Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery. I'm preparing to feed these two bins down here. And I got this weird arrangement where the oldest stuff goes across left to right, but then it switches back, and goes in a reverse order down here and then continues back this way. So I usually like to start with the older of the two bins. So I don't want to let myself get confused and go left to right. On this shelf, I gotta go right to left. These bins, well, normally I don't even mark my red wiggler bins to indicate what kind of worms are in there, since that was the type of worm that I started with. Usually it's only the nightcrawler bins or the mixed worm bins where I actually indicate what kind of worms live in there, but you can see that bin right there says RW on it. So that's kind of an anomaly. I don't always mark my bins to show that they've got red wigglers in them, but in that case, it's not just red wigglers, they're my original red wigglers. So I've just been sort of treating those as a special, separate little class of red wigglers. It was 12 days since we last checked in on these bins, and I don't remember. I think there was some asparagus, maybe a couple other things, but after 12 days I'm assuming that they could probably go for a little bit more food. And what I got for them isn't much today, so we'll throw it in there and maybe we'll be back here in another 10 or 12 days again. So I'm going to put on a glove, get these bins up on the shelf, starting with the older one, and then we'll work our way to the younger one and get them fed. So let's get to work. So now what I have for them is it's a single banana peel that I broke in half while it was still frozen. It's starting to thaw out. And then this piece of pumpkin, I had just cut a hole into a pumpkin and then I froze that slab and I was able to break it in half. That too is still kind of frozen. So that's what they're getting. One bin is going to get this and the other bin will get this. And we could supplement that with some coffee, because I've got a couple days worth of coffee here, as well as some worm chow off on the side. So it's not that big of a feeding, but still it's better than nothing. Actually, once we put it in there, it might look like more. But just to look at it here on the bench, it doesn't seem like much. Here on the bench. Did I call my bench a shelf before? I don't know why. I think I did. Doesn't matter. So last time, I think one of the bins, it might have been the other bin, had such tattered top coverings that we ended up replacing them. And here, top coverings were holding up pretty good. And even now, they're seeming to hold together. So instead of trying to manhandle them, I'm just going to gently remove them, because it does look like we could just continue using them. I don't know why. I always try to see how much use I can get out of certain things. Although this piece right here looks like it's getting pretty heavily worked. I don't know. I guess we'll see what we could do about putting it to use one last time, and then maybe next time we could put it to use as bedding instead of as a top covering. This, though, since we've got nice replacement coffee filters, what was serving the function of feeding zone indicator, this coffee filter right here, we could go and use as bedding in the feeding, as well as any of these little scraps of top covering paper I just didn't manage to lift up. Alright, so I know there was asparagus. It's just bothering me that I can't remember what the other food item was. Although I do remember chatting with people in the comments of my videos talking about the asparagus and how that might still show leftovers, but whatever it was that they got in addition to the asparagus, I thought it was something that might not show signs of leftovers. You know what I think this is? This is kind of cool how it looks. I had some tomatoes that were still green on my plants at the end of the season before the first frost set in. I took all my old tomatoes and they'd been sitting around for quite a long time. Some of them had ripened, some of them had gotten eaten. And it was just a couple feedings ago that we actually finally did away with the last of my garden tomatoes. And this, to me, looks a lot like the stem, as well as some of the flower on the top of the tomato. Still holding out, but hardly even recognizable as what it was. So that's a little bit of leftover. Here is still skin, or peel or whatever, the outside of a tomato. I think both bins actually had a tomato, even as recently as the last feeding. A tomato where the skin had not yet been broken, so it was actually still like an intact tomato. It was kind of mushy and gooey, but But I don't know what to expect. Maybe it's, maybe those are still holding up. I don't go too out of my way to try to make sure, I don't damage something like that. I'm not like trying to preserve food items to last long. It's just that when they do, they're, it seems a little unusual. Look at that. They crawled into the into the asparagus to eat it. I guess the outer portion of it's tough, so they crawled down into it to nibble away at it. So here's another one which probably has worms inside of it as well. Just interesting how it's kind of hollow because the outer portion is so tough. And they were pretty big pieces of asparagus. Sometimes they're, thinner, like the size of your pinky or whatever, but this one was probably the size of my thumb. When they get big, they're even more fibrous like that, so that's why these ended up just getting hacked off and just the tip of it, where it's a little bit thinner and a little bit easier to eat, not so fibrous. Those were made into human food, and the oh, look at that. Oh, I just burst it. I could feel the pop when I touched it, so even though it was holding out so good up until now, I just damaged it, and that's the beginning of the end. However, this one feels like it's still resisting from me pressing on it gently. So that one didn't pop yet. So we still have one more tiny cherry tomato that's still holding out. That might still be here next time. Although the one that I just burst, I think that one's going to get eaten. As soon as they can get at the moisture inside of a tomato, they're going to go for it. But like I said, those tomatoes were leftovers from quite a number of feedings ago. So I still haven't really stumbled on whatever that other food item was placed in here alongside the asparagus. I think it was something that was going to be gone. So we might not even get a reminder as to whatever it was. So here's the stem of a banana. A whole bunch of worms hanging out down in here, nibbling away at all the different types of foods they've got. So things look pretty healthy and happy down here. This was a somewhat larger tomato when I kind of looked at the inside of it. All these seeds were in here, but there was still some of the meaty flesh of the tomato, and the worms were working on it. It's almost down to just skin anymore with a few seeds. But I guess we've more or less satisfied my curiosity. I don't think we're going to find whatever that other food item was. Who knows? Maybe it'll just occur to me. Oh, look at this. This piece also feels like it's kind of resisting at a certain point. It might not be breached yet. So we'll carefully put it back in so as to not break it. Now we've actually got two that are not yet burst, and maybe it'll last another feeding. It's like I said, I'm not really going out of my way to try to make that happen here, but it is kind of funny when something like a tomato, which the worms generally do like to gobble up pretty quickly because it's all moisture and whatever, but if they can't get into it because of the skin, or they don't even know what's inside of it, they just kind of cruise right past it and don't give it a second thought because they probably can't sense that it's a yummy morsel of food. It sort of resists the breakdown process and lasts and lasts and lasts. So we've created a pretty good size hole down here. Before I forget, I'm going to bring back this coffee filter because it's going to become bedding. And you know, I'm questioning whether I even want to put more bedding in here. I guess it would be nice, and I've got a nice supply of prepared bedding, so why don't I go grab that, and we could plop some of that in here to go with the feeding, and then we'll apply what we bought for them. Here we go. I usually want to be careful not to plop worms down into my prepared bedding mix. So I did see one itsy bitsy tiny worm. There's another one. So small. I guess it's the really small ones that end up sticking to your glove and then you never even realize they were there until they just end up plopping off, and that's the end of them. That's not what we want to have happen, right? Okay. Nice generous portion of bedding. Since the foods that they're getting are kind of limited, they can nibble on the bedding. So I'm returning these old bits that we encountered along the way, the asparagus, the tomato. There was a couple corn cobs I noticed in there. Not much, but a little piece of it right there. And I think that's everything as far as leftovers go. Now we can plop in today's feeding. Why don't we begin with the coffee? It'll become sort of a barrier so that if there's any worms underneath, then the frozen stuff will be placed on top of the coffee rather than on top of the worms. This is going to become our replacement feeding zone indicator. Now, one thing I usually like to do lately is, since I've been making worm chow, this is my worm chow, I've been combining it with the coffee, and I think it makes for something that the worms really do enjoy eating a lot. It's kind of, you know, because the coffee is such a singular, bland thing, it feels to me like if I mix it with some worm chow, now it's, you know, half a dozen different things, because there's birdseed in there, there's, you know, pancake mix. I think I even ground up some old cantaloupe seeds that I'd pulled out of a cantaloupe. A couple other things that were all mashed together, ground up, turned into a yummy worm chow. And this here is also kind of a powdery looking substance. This is it's my grit. It's basically pulverized eggshell. And that's that. We can get these little guys back up on the shelf and let them continue with what they were doing in here for us. Continue breaking down our kitchen scraps. And, you know, before we put this system back up on the shelf, I usually like to till up the outer edges, kind of aerate the material if nothing else, but also at the same time check things out to make sure everything's in good shape. Since the feedings usually bring with them a little bit of moisture, I usually expect that the moisture levels down in the feeding area are going to be, you know, adequate for the worms, but sometimes I worry about the outer edges possibly drying out a little bit. Although with the plastic coverings that we use, I think we're protecting ourselves pretty good in these systems from evaporation and undue drying. So to me, this is usually a pretty good sign when I could check the very outskirts of the system where there's been no feedings applied. It's pretty much almost all bedding. I mean, pretty much almost all castings. And there's, you know, tons and tons of worms hanging out in this stuff. That to me is usually a pretty good sign. All right. So now you might have noticed when we were feeding, when we were looking at these up on the shelf, the labels indicated different dates because these two systems are not the same age. A lot of times when I'm dealing with kind of buddied up systems, kind of a pair of bins like these two that are managed on the same day in the same way, a lot of times they're bins that were started on the same day. Like I think I showed the European night crawlers over there too. I don't remember, did I? Those might have actually started on the same day, whereas these two systems started on separate days. And then at some point later, I think we just decided that we're going to buddy them up. Well, as far as top covering goes, that one's seen better days. And here's that really cool looking tomato stem, which I don't think is going to last any longer than a couple more days maybe. Although now that it's just sitting out on the surface, maybe it will actually evade, you know, worm action and getting eaten. I suppose if it was down in the bedding, it would probably have a better chance at being eaten, but whatever. At some point, it'll all go. Yeah, I think next time this stuff is going to all be bedding. I just figured, what the heck, let's see if we can preserve it for one more round as top covering, and then we'll worry about swapping it out with new stuff next time. Ooh, let's get this little wormy off the wall. Get them back down into the bin. Come on, buddy. Don't want to leave you stranded. Although out on the wall, I think that any worm would eventually figure out how dry it is and that they don't like it, and that they'll dive down in time, so probably didn't have to worry too much about it. Here too, just checking my glove, make sure I don't drop worms all over the place. Let's go get the other bin and get them fed too. Here we go. So I think the real difference in age is not much. It's you know, maybe 2.5 weeks or so. So basically this system was started at the very end of May, and the other one was started in the middle of May. So there's about 2.5 weeks, I believe, difference in ages between these two systems. And at this point, that difference is almost, you know, negligible. 2.5 weeks for systems that are now, you know, who knows how old, hundreds of days old. I don't know about hundreds, but getting up there. I mean, it's January. So I see lots of worms hanging out on this paper here. Usually I try to evict them before I set the paper aside and get to work. I guess I'll just see if I can evict the ones that are on the very outer surface, and the ones that are under the folded over paper, they'll be okay without the bright lights scaring them off. And then this here, once again, we'll recycle this feeding zone indicator to become bedding when we feed, and we'll give them a nice new feeding zone indicator. Still not coming back to me, although I do remember in the video, because I breezed through the video really quick last night when I was trying to decide which worms are going to get fed today. I watched the video from the last feeding. I remember I was holding a bag with the asparagus in it, and I was kind of showing it now. And see, all I had to do was sort of think about it for a moment, and now it came back to me. So this system got a little bit of red cabbage, or purple cabbage, whatever it's called, and the other bin got green cabbage. The other bin actually got a thicker, chunkier piece of the cabbage stem, like the heart of the cabbage head, as well as like a leaf, one leaf of cabbage, green cabbage, and then I had one leaf of red cabbage that came into this one. And since I only had one core sort of stem for the green cabbage, I gave a little bit more asparagus to this bin, to be fair, since this one wasn't getting like a stem of cabbage and only got one leaf. But cabbage, from what I remember, usually feeding it to my worms, they love it, and they usually eat it right up. So after 12 days, not too surprising that we're not seeing any leftovers of the green or red cabbage. But I guess if we catch a glimpse of something kind of purple in color, because the red cabbage has sort of a purple color, then we'll know what it is, and it will be surprising if we do encounter it. My guess is we won't. And anything else besides asparagus and cabbage would definitely register as leftovers from a feeding even further back than 12 days ago. I think the interval between feedings last time might have been 10 days, and then before that I don't recall. And I could be wrong, I don't recall exactly, but something about that sort of rings a bell now that I'm thinking about watching the video and recalling some of the details. And piece of tomato peel. Again, here too, there was a tomato that was holding out without having been burst yet, and I kind of wondered if we would encounter it. Seems kind of unlikely. And you might already be noticing how many more pieces of asparagus there are in here, because we did want to compensate for not giving them the stem of cabbage like the other bin got. So these guys got a few extra pieces of asparagus so that we could be fair as far as giving an equal quantity of food to each system. So many nice castings piling up, gotta say. I don't know, I saw something that resembled a big leaf or whatever. I wondered if that could have been the cabbage. It seemed unlikely. Just interesting how that, whatever that kind of leaf is, it just seems to be holding up really good. It shows hardly any nibble action. Okay. I think we've explored enough here. I don't think we're going to encounter many more leftovers, and we've definitely created a large enough crevice to drop today's feeding into. I didn't really notice any intact tomatoes though, so perhaps whatever tomato it was that was still intact last check-in here has since gone. Oops, could this have been it? Seems like this one's kind of holding up, and I'm pressing it and I'm still feeling resistance. We might actually have a tomato that's holding out here too, and it might be that one. All right, let's go ahead and get these guys fed and we'll be done. Another leftover piece of asparagus. And a banana stem, which is good because we saw one of those in the other bin too, and it's the first one we encountered here. I guess maybe the one thing I didn't really notice was any corn cob. Although maybe I did, and maybe I put it aside and I was just busy talking and didn't notice it. Okay, very nice. Both of these bins I think are really, really nice. Like, okay, before I forget, once again, like we did before, putting this this feeding zone indicator / coffee filter to somewhat better use now by using it as bedding down in the feeding area, because we're swapping it out with a nice new one, and then we'll arrange the feeding the same way we did before so that the frozen objects we're putting in at the end don't get placed on top of any unsuspecting wormies. Alright, very, very nice. Definitely a couple fun bins to check in on. Nothing overly extraordinary. Overly extraordinary? Yeah, nothing really sets these systems apart other than, you know, maybe the fact that I've got my original worms here. But other than that, they're just a couple red wiggler bins doing a great job breaking down our everyday kitchen scraps and leaving behind for us a whole bunch of beautiful castings. That's going to be a nice treat for my plants when it comes time to go gardening in a couple months. So now one thing we'll put that on top of the frozen, freshly added foods. But before we do that, let's just do my old mixing of the coffee and worm chow. Yeah, very nice. And then in can come our little pumpkin and banana peel treat. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like much of a feeding, but I assume that with all that bedding going in there, because all the bedding eventually becomes food too, right? As well as the coffee and worm chow to supplement the somewhat, you know, meager feeding, it ends up becoming a pretty good feeding. If I just came in here with a banana peel or half of a banana peel and half of a, you know, little piece of pumpkin, it wouldn't seem like much, but by adding a day's worth of coffee and dressing it up with some nice worm chow, it's a nice feeding. And I just wonder, you know, it doesn't seem like the sort of stuff that we're going to see many leftovers of next time. At least not the pumpkin. I don't think we're going to see many, if any, leftovers of the pumpkin. Perhaps the stem. And I can't remember which of the two systems got the stem end of the banana peel, because like I said, it was just a single banana peel broken in half so that I could share it between the two bins. So if we do find leftovers of this feeding next time, it might be just a single banana stem in one of the bins, and it's possible that the peel given to the other bin will be, you know, gone. And then there might be tomato leftovers, there might be asparagus leftovers. I don't know about the asparagus. It seems like they're doing a good job on it. The more fibrous stuff is taking a little bit more time, which is to be expected. But if we give them another 10-12 days before we come back in here again, chances are that stuff will be either gone, or if there are leftovers, those leftovers are probably going to be almost unrecognizable. Very nice. All of these castings are so nice and crumbly. Such nice material in these bins. But I think playtime is over. It is interesting. I just can't seem to resist, you know, gawking at my little worms and what they've done over time, because they really do a heck of a job. The red wigglers are fun. I mean, every worm's fun in its own way, but the red wigglers are just sort of the gold standard when it comes to vermicomposting. You know, some of the bigger worms just make really large castings and burn through food really quick and, you know, whatever. Every worm kind of has its own little charm to it. But the red wigglers are just the old reliable. Very, very hardy, very capable of withstanding wide ranges of temperature swings. Pretty good at always trying to repopulate, and a whole bunch of other things. Just very easy to maintain, very easy to care for. All right, everyone. We're pretty much done here. I got a couple things I got to take care of putting away and cleaning up. I'm not going to waste your time with that, though. Before I go, though, really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, take care. Thanks for watching. Bye.